All right. Well, thank you everybody for logging on today. Welcome to the January Gladys Seacat Leadership Series. Today we are going to be hearing from Dr. Scott Lawrence, professor at Purdue University, Dr. Kristine Ensign, program director at Ohio University, and Dr. James Onate, program director at the Ohio State University. So I will turn it over to our panel speakers here.
All right, we have a fun format here.
I would just go ahead and start off if you guys wanted to say like a little bit about your background, kind of how you got in to athletic training, and then how you guys kind of got into the higher ed side of athletic training. What was your pathway? Whoever wants to go first.
Good, Kristine. You're better at this than all the rest of us.
Oh, I don't know about that, but sure, I'll start. So I got into athletic training probably somewhat similarly to, I think, a lot of people, as I learned what athletic training was in high school when I got injured during basketball practice, and my coach said, go see the trainer. And I looked at my coach and I said, who and what is that? And they said, go down the hallway down there and around the corner, and there's a room and she's in there. And so I followed the instructions, and I just had a jammed finger, so it wasn't like anything real crazy was going on. But that was my first introduction to athletic trainers, and it proceeded then to by my junior year. That was my freshman year. So then by my junior year of high school, my athletic trainer said, hey, you seem to have some interest in what's happening when you come in here. Do you want to help out with practices and games? And so I started helping out my junior year, was able to take independent study in it my senior year of high school. And then from there, I went to North Dakota State and did my bachelor's degree there. And then from North Dakota State, I knew I wanted to, during that time was when I was like, I want to definitely get my master's degree. And I had considered, like maybe someday I want to get a PhD, but because I kind of, I liked seeing what my professors did in my education program. I was like, oh, maybe that's something I could do in the future. But I wasn't like super set on that, but I knew I wanted to do my master's degree and do a thesis and research. And so I ended up at Ohio University in their post-professional Master of Science program. And it was there that I got to be a teaching assistant and a preceptor for students in their bachelor's degree program. And that really cemented my desire to go into education eventually. So my original plan was to go work for several years. My estimated timeline is 5 years after my master's degree to gain more real world experience, get a lot of kind of hands-on time, so that when I I'd go back at my PhD, and then teach, I would have a lot of stories and experience, and hopefully kind of have some things figured out in athletic training. That timeline got sped up a little bit just with circumstances. I was offered a teaching position at a small school in Indiana called Franklin College after a few years after my master's degree. So I started working my PhD a little bit earlier because of that, and got into education sooner than I expected to. But I ended up getting my PhD at Indiana State in a higher ed program before I kind of formally, started my journey as a program director. And during the time I was working clinically, I primarily worked in the high school setting. and had a little bit of college time. When I was at Frank College, I worked with their women's lacrosse team, and I spent a year in Toledo where I worked with their club sports teams. So it was, working in the high school setting is a great experience, and I think everyone should spend some time in the high school setting, even if their eventual goal is the collegiate or professional or clinical industrial settings. But that's kind of like my quick timeline of how I got to where I am today.
Go ahead, Scott. I'll defer to you, and then I'll have a short story.
Sure. So I think my pathway into athletic training was probably a little bit similar, at least at the start. I had that high school injury, sprained my ankle, went and saw the athletic trainer, didn't know who that person was, had really no idea. And that was also about the time, and this is back in the early 90s. So every high school kid in America, I think, got the same aptitude test. And it was supposed to tell us who and what we were supposed to be in the future. And it came back and it told me I either needed to be an engineer or I needed to be in healthcare. And so I'm flipping through this book in the library about all the potential careers that would fit into either engineering or healthcare. And I came across physical therapy. Athletic training was not in that book, unfortunately. And I said, oh, that's kind of close to what I was doing with that person who helped me with my ankle sprain. So I'm going to be a physical therapist. I really didn't even know what physical therapy was. So I enrolled in college, started at Butler University, and they didn't have a PT program. So I'm going to try this athletic training thing because it's supposed to be similar. And that's where I fell in love with it. And I'm from small town Indiana. And it just so happens that the head athletic trainer at Butler, Ralph Reef, was from the exact same hometown as I was. So there was an instant connection. Ralph continues to be a good friend and mentor to me to this day. And he really helped push me along this career path of mine. But graduated from Butler, went to Middle Tennessee State, got my master's degree, then went to the University of Indianapolis and got a PT degree and then my doctorate degree from the university there. Along the way, my focus was really never to be in academics. I was never envisioned myself as being a teacher. I was going to be a clinician. I was actually going to be the next Kevin Wilk. That was my goal. I wanted to be a high level rehabilitation specialist working with all kinds of post-op conditions. And that was my pathway. I spent 2 years in high school, 3 years working for college setting, and then 7 years in the clinic working full time, and was doing a lot of presentations, was doing a lot of writing and research at the time, and really kind of got burnout on what I was doing. And the best part of my day was the interactions with students. And so I thought, gosh, there might be something there. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And I was seeing a lot of smoke. And so I started working with some of my friends at University of Indianapolis, where I'd gone to PT school, and started adjuncting for some of the athletic training classes and teaching non-major classes. And then I started teaching some of the classes within the major, and I really took off from there. I finished my doctorate degree, got hired on into the faculty, and that was my progression into the world of teaching.
Well, I was born. No, I'm not going to go that far back. I'm going to go real quick, and I'm going to skip over a couple people, but a little different. I never had an athletic trainer in my high school, and my high school in upstate New York still does not have an athletic trainer. Small town on the river, on the banks of the Hudson River, right across from Albany, and we had a university day a career day, where an athletic trainer came from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and his name was Anthony Ortolano. And he came down and he talked about his day, which was taking care of Division I hockey and the rest of the things there. And it was taking care of injuries, taking care of, everything from concussions to knee injuries to all these things. And I just had a second concussion in football and so on and so forth. And I was like, wow, that sounds really interesting. And so I remember writing in my yearbook that I'm going to be a doctor of sports medicine. Had no idea what that actually meant, I had no idea what doctor meant. Like, I'm first generation. Nobody went to medical school. My parents came from South America, did not even finish high school. So it's me and my brother and my parents in the United States trying to figure out this university thing. Luckily, my brother figured it out before me. He's a couple years older. He went to Syracuse as a biomedical engineer. So I went to RPI as an athletic training student. Major was actually interdisciplinary science because they didn't have athletic training. So I'd hang out in the athletic training room with Anthony, and he would put me to work. And literally, I was, this is the late 80s, early 90s. I was covering teams, not having any idea what I was doing. And it still kind of fostered a you need to think on your own, you need to handle yourself, you need to be professional early, all the things that our students kind of have to do when they're in college. They're just guided a little bit under curriculum now, and so on and so forth. So I'll jump ahead a couple things. I went to University in Indianapolis. I transferred there. Then I transferred to University of Florida. Spent some great time. And in the office, I had a work study job in the office with Mary Beth Horodysky. And I was in the office watching these professors do all their things. And I said, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, our department chair plays tennis during the day. How awesome of a job is that? Our other folks are in the lab and doing all these things. And I was like, their day is not the same all the time. And so I worked high schools there, loved the kids. And I said, well, which way do I want to go? I'm not sure. So I went to get my master's, did my master's at University of North Carolina. And my first professor there, so under Dr. Bill Prentice and Dr. Kevin Guskowitz, was his first year at Carolina, was my first year at Carolina. And so it was really fun exploring all the avenues of research and education and all these things. Cadaver anatomy, Kevin taught our cadaver anatomy class. Now he's chancellor and all this big time stuff. But I remember when he was still deciding whether he was going to go down the concussion route or the ankle sprain route for research. And we were on an ankle sprain project with him. One of my classmates who's going to hear this and his head's going to explode, but Dr. Brian Riemann, who's a professor down at Armstrong State in Georgia Southern system, he knew he wanted to go get his PhD and all these things. I had no idea what a PhD meant. I had no idea how long it would take. I had no idea what it actually was. So Kevin and Brian kind of taught me about those things, but I still was a little bit wanting to do something else. So I actually was a high school teacher and an athletic trainer for 2 years at Southeast Raleigh High School. Dream job. I wanted to be there 45 years and, be the old guy that they call Doc and all those things and help all the kids. And halfway through that, kind of kept on pulling back to go into higher education and go into research and having some different things in a day. Actually, the thing that really turned me off at high school was the bells. So the ringing bell in between classes drove me absolutely crazy because I wanted to keep doing stuff and the bells restricted my time. So anyways, I went back, got my PhD in human movement science at University of North Carolina. Some people will see this as, they see me as the researcher. My goal was to be the clinical coordinator in a university. That was my goal. That didn't work. I went to my first job was at Boston University, and I had some great people there. Sarah Brown was a fantastic, program leader, world leader. Mark Larson, fantastic clinical coordinator. So there I was doing all the research, and that was my job. Fast forward, I went to Old Dominion University, worked with Bonnie Van Lunen. Again, I was the researcher. She was really handling all the clinical coordinating pieces and the program directing pieces. I moved to Ohio State in 2010. Mark Merrick's there doing all the program director pieces, and Laura Harris is doing all the clinical coordinating pieces. And then Samar Long comes in and does the clinical coordinating after Laura goes to OU. I had no vision of actually being heavily involved in athletic training education, except for when I first started. And then 2 years ago, Mark took a job, or 3 years ago, Mark took a job at Toledo. And it was time for me to be a program director. And so now I see the whole other side of what higher education is, which was not only about research, but really about helping students and doing all those things. So that's a long pathway. I've left some people out on that pathway. I still am clinically involved, but in a different way. I do a lot of baseball coaching, strength and conditioning, and athletic training kind of wrapped up into one within the high schools and the youth in the area. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. The next question that I had was if you had worked, we touched on this a little bit, but if you had worked as a preceptor and how you take that into your current role as a professor or program director.
All right, we'll go in reverse order. So I'll go first on this one. I worked as a preceptor for the high school, and I had a couple students from North Carolina with me, and I worked as one also as a graduate student. And you know, it's my responsibility as a preceptor to take care of that individual while still taking care of our patients. And I loved it. I thought that was one of the best things that we could do, is teach in the field clinically and talking about all the, you know, the live action pieces that we had in the classroom, and now we're actually in a different classroom setting. So I think it's been great. I still utilize it all. I'm a little older, so that's been some time, but I think it's very valuable for all educators to have clinical experiences to share. So.
Yeah, I was a preceptor as well, really from the beginning of my career. I started off working in a high school, and the local program to me started sending students. And this was right on the cusp of all of the programs really coming on board with Katie. The internship route had been phased out. Everyone's going into an accredited program. And so we're looking for this new thing called a preceptor. And I volunteered and started into that path, and really didn't exit from that ever. I've maintained my role as a preceptor throughout, and I find now that it's probably as valuable to my program and to me as it ever has been, because anytime we're trying to do something programmatically, I always try to think, what was it like when I was a preceptor? Because, you know, we're talking about busy clinicians who are trying to take knowledge that students are learning and help them move it into clinical practice. And that integration is one of the key pieces, I think, to allowing a student to grow, learn, and develop. And they have to be able to do that at a high level, but they also have to be able to function in their job, right? And so I always try to think, you know, what are we asking our preceptors to do? And is this realistic? And I use my past experience to help me with that. Is that something that is possible or not? I think, you know, I agree. It's vitally important for folks who are teaching in programs to have that type of experience to help inform what they're doing and what they're asking their students and their preceptors to do.
Yeah, I had limited opportunities to be a preceptor. When I started working clinically during my master's degree, that was back in the day when we had clinical instructors and approved clinical instructors, and you had to work for a year before you could be an approved clinical instructor. So I didn't get students at that job until my second year, which actually now as a program director actually very much appreciate that there was that limit, because I kind of wish now we would still, like, I mean, we do it as a program, we try to avoid using first year ATs just so they can get their feet wet, but you know, that's just something that I kind of think about back then. But after I left that program and that job at Eastern High School, I had a lot of jobs where there was no AT programs around. Um, and so I didn't have students available to come to learn at my clinical site where I was working, and I really missed it. You know, having students at your site when you're working keeps you sharp. They ask you a ton of questions. They challenge you all the time, and not in like a bad way, and definitely in a good way. and you can have a lot of really good philosophical discussions about things related to athletic training, whether it's treatment or professional related. And so I really missed that experience. And I was able to get back into precepting when I started teaching at Franklin College. Part of my contract was to be in the athletic training facility during the day for a couple hours, and I would just work with the students who were in the AT facility, and I would help with patients and kind of fill in where things were needed. So I was able to kind of work closely with our students clinically, but then also teach them in the classroom. And I really enjoyed that kind of connection with the students. And now I precept on a very random basis. I work for a medical center part-time, and that medical center provides services to area schools that we use as clinical sites. So sometimes I fill in for our preceptors when they take time off, and then if we have a student there, then I get to kind of be their fill-in preceptor for the day. I agree with everything that like Scott and Jimmy have said so far about preceptors and how we think about them as a program director. But the other thing I think of, in addition to that, is how I talk to students about being a student from a preceptor's perspective, like how you want to engage with your preceptor, how you need to be a little bit proactive to get the learning experiences that you're wanting to have. And so I try to have those conversations with our students to kind of make sure that the tone is set, because while preceptors love to teach, they're not going to go 100% out of their way to teach you if you're not coming to them. And so I think that's an important thing for students to think about from their student to preceptor relationship, in addition to our working with preceptors from the preceptor to student relationship.
And as a follow-up question to that, what education did you need to go from being a clinical athletic trainer or working in high school or college to your current role?
Scott, why don't you go first? You haven't gone first yet.
Well, okay. So I think in the current landscape of higher education, it's really challenging to come into a role here teaching in a program without some type of doctoral degree. Lots and lots of conversation about what is the appropriate degree. Can that be a clinical doctorate? Should it be an academic doctorate? I think that's going to depend on the institution that you're at and the faculty line that you would be applying for. For example, at my institution, Purdue University is a big R1 institution, and you might think that it has to be a PhD or some type of academic doctorate. And our faculty lines are clinical lines, meaning that we are not held to the research productivity that the rest of our tenure and tenure track colleagues are. Our focus is more on taking clinical knowledge and applying it into skills or into students. So in a clinical faculty role, we can have either an academic doctorate or a clinical doctorate. So I think that's something that you have to consider if this is something you're thinking about. For me, I went kind of smack dab right in the middle of that. I have a Doctor of Health Science degree, and that's considered an academic degree, but it also has a very strong clinical focus. So it's really right in between what you would call the hardcore science research track degrees of a PhD or an EDD, or a clinical line of the DAT. So that's one thing I think you need. The other kind of educational opportunity I think you really have to engage in order to come into an administrative role within a program is really start to engage with the CADE. The standards and the operations of a program are really complex, and it's much more than it used to be. In fact, I think if you are coming into this role for the first time, you can potentially be overwhelmed by all of the things that you are now responsible for. So having some type of knowledge and experience with the KD standards, with the operations, by going to just the accreditation conferences, being a site visitor, lots and lots of opportunities to engage in that. But I think that's something that can be helpful, even though it's not a formalized educational process. It's certainly, I think, prerequisite knowledge for being a clinical coordinator or for a program director on some level.
I'll go in the middle. I'll take the tenure track route or the PhD route. You know, I was fortunate. We had a lot of in our program. We had a lot of instructional teaching courses for us to be able to take and to get supervised and to learn how to teach. We also taught a variety of classes as both master's students and as doctoral students. So, you know, it wasn't the first time that I was ever teaching a class when I went out to a job. For me, I was fortunate in that I had outstanding mentors at every place that I had been. So learning about the you know, different accreditation processes kind of by osmosis than actually studying. And now I'm also fortunate to have a great team. One of my big things is there is no way that you can run a program solo. And so, you know, we have some outstanding faculty, Samar Long for a lot of our clinical coordinating pieces. Matt Brancaleone does a lot of our clinical coordinating pieces. He's dual degree, PTAT. Laura Boucher is our director of anatomy. And I just assigned her as director of admission. She's got a great background. And all of us have different PhDs in different areas, or EDDs. And so, you know, it's a variety of different pathways. Some of us are tenure track, some of us are clinical track that we call it here, or really non-tenure track. So it runs a gamut. And I think for individuals watching this or, you know, hearing this, there's a lot of different pathways that you could take. And I don't think there's exactly one that's perfect or the right fit, or sorry, select the right fit for you. There's not exactly only one pathway that you can take.
Yeah, I did a lot of just had to make those decisions about what doctorate degree I wanted to get when I went back to get my doctorate. And I elected at the time to focus on the PhD option. And I did that based on advice from various individuals, but to give myself some flexibility because of what was unpredictable with what institutions would expect for faculty positions, whether they would take a clinical doctorate or not in roles. And at the time, I wasn't set on being a program director right away in my career. I knew that it seemed like an aspirational goal to become a program director at some point. And so I chose the PhD route because I was like, well, maybe I'll do research for a time being before I settle down into a program director position. And for myself, that path ended up being very different. And I think that's the other thing that people who are considering going into higher ed, you have to be willing to be flexible with your career path because opportunities are going to come up randomly. Things aren't going to necessarily work out the way you plan. Like it's just so variable where, you know, staying flexible and just kind of rolling with it is what's going to, you know, make your career more enjoyable. And so I ended up in a program director role earlier than I had planned on. And so I never actually got to do the research part that I had intended on doing because being a program director is very time consuming. And the administrative responsibilities are large. And there are program directors who do research for sure. But being a program director before tenure is pretty taxing on individuals just because the tenure process has high expectations at a lot of institutions, not all, but a lot. And then being a program director has high expectations. So that research desire that I had didn't really culminate for me. but I got to do the other thing that I thought I was going to do later in my career, earlier in my career, which has been a rewarding experience also. So that I think that's the other thing to think about when you're thinking about how do I get there. It's, you know, you could pick your degree and then find yourself going in a totally different path than what you expected, or your route to being a program director isn't a straight line. It's, you know, got nice curves in it, or maybe some sharp turns along the way.
So the last question that I had prepared was, what advice would you give to a student or a young professional looking into potentially taking a similar career path?
I guess I'll start on this one. I think the biggest thing is enjoy what you're doing, right? And I think that's an important part. You won't enjoy every moment of every day. I think that's a kind of an impossibility. But are you excited to go do the thing that you're doing? And I like telling stories. My students know that. I like giving advice. I like life coaching. I like mentoring. I like whatever term you want to call it. So I get to do that on a regular basis. So that would probably be my biggest advice is figure out the pathway that you enjoy, what you like to do, and start seeking opportunities in those things. And you don't know what they're going to lead to.
I'll jump in next here. I think the first thing I would say is, are you sure? Are you sure you really want to do this? Because it's not like it was when I was going through as a student. It's just a different role. It used to be in the old days that you could teach in the morning and be a clinician in the afternoon. And those days have by and large come and gone in a lot of school settings because of the requirements to be a faculty and, quite honestly, the requirements to be a clinician. It's really challenging to blend those together. I really applaud the folks who are able to balance that and do that if those schools are able to pull that off. I had a dual clinician educator role when I was at the University of Indianapolis for the first 4 years of my time there. And I never felt like I could do both well. I always felt like I was missing something. And the modern educator here, it's a all encompassing job. So I think you have to want to do that. And if you're a clinician, I always say this was the best thing for me, but it may or may not be the best thing for you. And so you have to want it, number one. And then I think maybe the second thing I would say is if you're on the fence on this, get in front of a class. That was the thing that really helped me. Get in front of a class. I adjunct taught a couple classes and did some guest speaking. And that was what convinced me that I could do this, but then also convinced me that I wanted to do it. And from there, I was able to traverse down a pathway to make it happen. But that was the big spark for me, getting in front of a class, interacting with students on that type of a level, as opposed to a one-on-one preceptorship level. And I think that's a nice way to move towards this type of position.
I think the only thing I would add to what Scott and Jimmy have said all is that all of us, all that are on here, the three of us, we all have clinical experience prior to being full-time educators. And I think if you are thinking of going down this path, and let's say you're currently in you're in a master's program right now, or you're in a bachelor's program for the few that are kind of finishing up, going straight through while is the quickest path. Bachelor's, master's, PhD, back to back to back. It's not necessarily the path that's going to help you be a good or great educator. And so I would just encourage you to take your time on that path, enjoy all the steps, enjoy the steps or explore the steps that your future students will be taking themselves, so that you can not only teach them what they need to know to be an athletic trainer, share your stories with them from when you were working clinically, but also mentor them on how to go through each of those steps that they're going to need to go through and the challenges that they all have. I think students appreciate being able to talk to their faculty and their preceptors about how life works, because it's a little abstract when you're working on your degree and you're not living it full time. So I think let yourself gain life experience on your way to becoming an educator.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone who spoke. Molly or Jenna, did you have any other questions?
I do actually have one more question, which may be a little bit of a touchy subject, but I'm just curious from like a higher ed perspective, how do you guys feel when everything was moved to a master's program? Do you feel like the students are still or better prepared now that it's been moved to an entry-level master's program? And then if you were kind of part of the tradition, like transition, how did that all go? And I guess how are you guys feeling about it?
Well, I guess I'll start because we haven't started our first class yet. So um, I have no idea. We are still interviewing for our MAT. So I don't know if the students are different or any of those things. You know, in the interviews, obviously it was a little different. And the transition is, you know, we get to kind of reinvent our program. It's not going to be the bachelor's to the master's is exactly the same thing. We get to add more content. We get to bring in more folks, and we get to run a time frame that's a little bit different. So we're all excited. You know, I think that's the only thing that you can kind of do on these situations. And then, you know, personally on whether we should have gone or shouldn't have gone or any of those types of things. You know, number one, that ship's floated away. So I'm not really worried about that. And then number two, you know, I was with Mark, Dr. Merrick, when he was doing that and going through all those pieces and getting a lot of the interesting discussions, let's say, from folks. And some of them folks are friends of mine. And, you know, definitely there was passionate on both sides. And for me, you know, anything that provides more educational opportunities for an in-depth for discussion on those things is important. Now, I get it from a financial standpoint that it's tough for folks. But, you know, we're trying to come up with some different ways, some unique things, and, you know, making it more valuable for what a graduate degree is supposed to be. So.
Higher University, we've had our Master Science professional program since 2019. So we were a few years in. I would say that from a foundational level, students will always be students. It doesn't matter if they're working on their bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree. Students are all about the same. But what I enjoy about teaching at the master's level is that our students are solely focused on athletic training. I am no longer fighting the battles of, yeah, you have to take that gen ed course, or, oh, you have to retake that biology course, or I don't have to worry about that. And my students don't have to worry about that. They can come in and take their athletic training classes and just be athletic training students and not be pulled in multiple directions. And I think that type of education makes for a more focused student. And so because of that, I think the degree change will actually create better clinicians. I know a lot of people worry about like, oh, well, there's, you know, shorter programs, and they're actually not that much shorter if you think about professional phases of bachelor's programs. They're actually quite similar. Most people think of like a 4-year bachelor's degree as all 4 years was 100% athletic training, and that's just not the case. I don't think the change is going to produce less quality in our future athletic trainers. And I see, you know, more mature students graduating just because they're 2 years older or more years older than students who are graduating when they're 22 years old, right? So it's more so just like a general maturity that you see. So, but like I said at the beginning, students are the same no matter what age they are, because students are trying to just survive whatever program they're in, whatever degree they're doing.
Yeah, and I think from my standpoint, I agree with Jimmy. The decision has been made, and we're not going back. So I think we have no choice but to move forward. And when you look at all of the factors that went into the decision, my own personal view is that it was a good decision. I understand the rationales behind those who disagree with it, and I agree with many of them. And there was no perfect compromise between the two actions. So, but by and large, I wholly supported it then. I wholly support it now. We're in an interesting place with our program because we have our last cohort of undergraduates and our first cohort of graduate MSAT students. And so I agree with Chris, students are students. And there are times where I go, geez, the graduate students are no different than the seniors that we have. And, when you put that into perspective, they're a year different, they're a year older. So of course they're not going to be that different. But I did have a moment early on in the program this past semester where we were doing an in-class activity. The students were wrapping up, and we had finished, and I said, hey, we're done with class. Class is scheduled for another half hour. If you guys want, we can be done. Or if you want, you can do this. And I gave them an alternative. And I guarantee if I did that with my seniors or with any undergraduate population, I don't want to single a class out here, but any undergraduate cohort, they would have left. It was lunchtime. They would have gone and beat the rush over at the dining halls. But the graduate students, they stayed, every single one of them. And that was my first time going, okay, this is different. And I don't know if that was maturity. I don't know if it was focus. It was probably multifactorial, probably a little bit of all of that. But I think, the focus is real, and the ability to really immerse themselves into the profession. They socialize at a higher level faster. And I think that the graduate students that I've seen so far really are able to just operate a little quicker because they're not distracted by all of the other totality of the undergraduate experience.
And I'll just add, so I'm old enough that I went through the internship route. So I love hearing people say, this is going to put us behind because it's 2 years and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I've heard all those arguments before. It was the same. I've taught and been through a post-professional program. You don't need masters in athletic training education. Go get something in something else. Like, there's always going to be two sides of every argument. I mean, just look at our country right now, right? So there's always been two sides. And what we need to do is just make sure that we're trying to educate our students, as Chris and Scott both said. They're students. That's what they're there for. And it's our responsibility, no matter if it's at the bachelor's, the master's, the doctoral level, to treat them as students, good quality people. Make sure that we're taking care of them as people first, right? That's our number one priority is that. And then, educating them in the skills of what they need to do. I think, in 10 years from now, we're going to be maybe going, well, should we go to the doctorate? And now it's the doctorate versus the master's, and so on and so forth. And we're not the only profession to go through this. It's like, we think it's always us, but you got medical school and nursing and PT and RT and OT, and they've been through the same thing. We're not alone in this piece. So just follow Twitter. You see everybody's in the same world. So
I work with many PTs. Some are MSPT and some are DPTs, and they're all very at each other all the time about it. So I understand. And thanks, guys, for your insight. I really appreciate it. I'm on the hiring side of thing. So it was mostly out of a, what do we think these students coming out? Because I work here in Bloomington, Illinois, so pretty much what Illinois State is, and they just finished their last series of undergrad students, and they're just finishing their the first series of master's students. And so obviously we have people applying and that kind of stuff. So just out of my own curiosity. So thank you.
So I don't really have any questions, I guess. I do have some thoughts and discussion, but I'm hoping to run into you guys maybe at Gladder or something instead.
Do we have any? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say maybe we'll just do like parting words.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess I'll start with, since I said it. My parting words, just from advice in higher education, is it's just it's a different way of helping people. I think a lot of times clinicians think that you're somewhat I don't know, selling out. You're doing something different. You're not a clinician. Like, I still view myself as a clinician, even though I'm doing it differently. Researchers think, oh, you're going to be a program director, so you're not doing research anymore. No, I'm still doing research. It's just a lot more clinically oriented. And then from an education standpoint, like, we always like to do these silos for everything. And, I don't see it as any different. I got in this business because I want to help people in an environment that I like helping people. The other things that I did and other places that I did, PT and medical school and all those things, and tracking, that I didn't like that environment as much as I like this environment. And so I think if we keep those things on our forefront, that we're just in the business of trying to help students basically go out and try to help people in the population that they choose, that will be fine. And it's not this researcher and clinician and educator. And I'm going to do a little pitch for a Zoom call for the athletic training research agenda. We're going to start a series in March. That's going to be morning coffee or afternoon lunch. It depends on which way we get more people there. It's probably going to be lunch, so we can get some West Coast people and not have to wake them up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And it's going to be, it's called Research is Care. And research is clinicians and researchers and educators coming together. And literally it's 60 minutes of Zoom, eat your lunch, 10-minute presentation on a topic. Our very first one's going to be on patient documentation. Lacey Harrison is going to just discuss what's kind of going on in that space. And then it's wide open for us to discuss, like, research projects that we want to do, or education projects that we want to do, or clinical tips that we can provide. And we're just on Zooms together. So I'll put that out there. Hopefully this comes out before March, and we'll be starting to announce this soon.
Yeah, I'll jump in next. And I'll echo what Jimmy said. I feel the same thing. I've had colleagues say, oh, you went to the dark side, you went into education, you're no longer a clinician, your opinions don't count. And that my response typically is, I'm doing the same thing as you, I'm just on a different sideline. And I think, I've said that to a couple folks, and that causes them to reflect, and it clicks for them that what we are doing is similar to what they're doing. We're just doing it differently. And if you are someone who likes to mentor, if you are someone who loves to help shape individuals, this is the greatest area of athletic training to get into. You get to be able to interact with the next generation of athletic trainers who are going to be out working in the fields, generating new knowledge, taking that new knowledge and putting it to work and putting it into action with their patients. And the reward for that is just immeasurable. And I've had so much growth and satisfaction and being able to engage with the bright minds that have come through my classrooms. I enjoy it immensely. And if you're thinking about a career in education, give it a try and see if it's for you. And if it is, you will love every minute of it, I hope, just as I have. And if it's not for you, I'm sure there's an area of athletic training that you will find that does fit you well.
I think the parting thing I would say is, what made me fall in love with athletic training was the successes of my patients, watching them reach their goals and get back onto the playing field or the activity that they were not able to do because of their injury. And I think education provides me basically the same feeling on a regular basis when a student succeeds in a class, in an assessment, a clinical site, and in any metric that they're being measured on. It's the same concept. It's watching someone reach a goal is just so fulfilling, and that ultimately is what drives me every day. And the days that I come home just like really amped up, or the days when there was something really great with a student where it was like this awesome breakthrough for them. And so from an education standpoint, if you like to see people succeed, which I think most athletic trainers, that's a rewarding part of the job, education can provide that same reward. It's a different population that's providing it on a daily basis, but it's still there. And that's why educators get sucked into being educators, because you're just like constantly happy for the students. I love the pomp and circumstance. I'm that person who's at graduation and I'm like, yes, we're graduating. You know, I get so excited. I want all the pomps and circumstance for our students, because as a first gen college student myself, like Jimmy, like I just view it all as like a win and a success, and I want everyone to have that. So don't feel like you're going to lose that little high that you get when your patient succeeds, because it still exists in education.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing, because Molly reminds me when I'm seeing her on there is the administrator part too, right? And that's another big piece. And really, the administrator is all three of those hats. And I would say the other piece is, as you go into education, your knowledge is a force multiplier. And what I mean by that is, when you're a clinician, you work one-on-one with a patient. But when you're an educator, you work one on, let's just say, 10 who are going to work with patients. So essentially, you're working with all their patients too. And then when you're a researcher, same thing, with force multiplier by your research being utilized across many classrooms. And the same thing, the administrators, like everybody that you're in charge of, Molly, they're all kind of along your culture and your message, and you're impacting so many people, just as Scott said, and I love that, a different sideline. So I think that's what higher education is a force multiplier. Like, we get to do so much more than just the one-on-one. So.
All right.
And now you three have all made me want to go back and get my PhD, so thank you. Sure, my fiance will love that. Sorry, Abigail, go ahead.
Yep.
We can close out now.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate all of you coming to speak, and we appreciate all the insights that you were able to share.
Everyone have a great weekend.